It is my pleasure and my honor to introduce my replacement, and this would be Major General Steve Ferrari of the 42nd Infantry Division.
Cool.
There you go.
Didn't mean to put you on the spot. I just wanted
Well, I just want to say we're glad to be here. Who? I want to introduce my Command Sergeant Major Corey Cush. So we look forward to spending some time with you here today and getting to learn the ropes. And interesting night we had, I guess, last night. So I guess that was our welcome to theater. And so look forward to touring Camp Earring today and getting to know everyone and meet everyone. And look forward to working with you over the next. We should be here for a few more months, right? July, I guess we're looking at.
August.
Okay.
You'll decide sooner or later.
Can't come fast enough, right?
All right.
Okay.
XO 252 and other commanders down in Saudi Arabia right now.
Good morning, team. Major Garrett Austin, Thunderbolt 5, XO for the 252 Armor Regiment. As Hickory 6 stated, Thunderbolt 6 is down in KSA, taking care of business down there. First, I'd like to start off by thanking General Ellis, your historian team. Gave us a lot of information for this, made it a lot easier to do, and we really appreciate that, sir. Next slide. Team, the agenda. We kind of broke this down like an off-order brief, so it's going to follow that time format. Starting off with the road to war, and then going from there. We'll end with some, it's not really lessons learned, it's key takeaways, is what we came up with. Next slide. All right, everyone, here's the road to war. So the events that led to the recapture of Bataan actually start, it says 1930s here, but after World War I, 1920s, the American government and the military figured out that we were going to have to face off with Japan at some point. So they started planning for that. And that culminated with War Plan Orange 3 up in the early 40s. So what they ascertained was that the Philippines, I won't say expendable, but they were going to be expected to have to defend themselves for a period of time until we reacted, build combat power, and push the Japanese back. However, we didn't plan for Pearl Harbor. The Japanese, they did the research. They ascertained that our center of gravity in the Pacific was the fleet. And they went for it on December 7th, 1941. I think history will show us that the actual center of gravity was the carrier forces that weren't there. So we got lucky. But they did disable the battle line, and they did attrit the fleet greatly, as we know. Almost simultaneously, they invaded the Philippines on December 8th. The battle in the Philippines that led up to the eventual surrender in Bataan is actually one of the most stiff resistance that the Japanese actually faced at that part of World War II. So they were doing a trading space for time, seeing if maybe we could get there in time to reinforce them. However, it was ascertained that we could not risk to get there to reinforce the Philippines. We would have had to risk the carriers, which would have given the Japanese what they were looking for, which would have been decisive battle, wiped out our carrier force, and we would not have been able to stop them. So gradually over time, they pushed us back. General MacArthur, who was actually stationed in the Philippines as the overall commander, President Roosevelt said, "You got to leave. We got to get you out." He gave us his famous "I shall return" speech, but we kept fighting. Very savage fighting, very, very desperate fighting. They were running low on food, ammunition, supplies. Some key firsts and lasts for the Army took place here. The actual first tank-on-tank battle occurred in the Philippines. The 38th Provisional Tank Group conducted a spoiling attack in Luzon to allow the withdrawal down into Bataan. It was very successful, and the Japanese didn't use their armor decisively after that. National Guardsmen activated to go were in that group. Key last was the arguably the last successful cavalry charge of the U.S. Army in U.S. Army history. The 26th Cavalry, the Philippine Scouts, as part of the cover to allow the withdrawal into Bataan, actually conducted a successful cavalry charge. Just to show you how bad it got, though, the cavalry soldiers had to turn their mounts in to the quartermaster, and they ended up having to eat their horses just to have food. They kept fighting, but ultimately they had to surrender. 9 April 1942, General King surrendered in Bataan. And that leads us to the Bataan Death March, how they treated our soldiers. The chaplain assistant is going to talk about why the Japanese acted that way to our guys. But our guys did not forget it, and General MacArthur did not forget it. So the battle of Midway happens, we're able to start pushing the Japanese back. So we're starting planning for the next phase of the war. It was not a given that we were coming back to the Philippines. There were some arguments back and forth. I think the Navy did not want to do it. General MacArthur and the Army did. MacArthur won out. He had skin in the game. He remembered his guys that he left behind. So 29th January 45, American troops landed in Luzon. And then 31 January 45, the battle for the capture of Bataan begins. All right, next slide. I'm going to play this. This is showing the Japanese strike on Pearl Harbor.
The United States would now be at war with the Axis powers, and the last traces of isolationism were to vanish overnight.
So again, that was key. That enabled the Japanese to have freedom of maneuver to conduct their operations across the Pacific. And as I stated earlier, luckily the carriers were not there and we were able to react. I'll be followed by the S2, Captain Simpson.
All right, good morning. Next slide. In late 1944, the Allied forces began to prepare a way for a Japanese defeat in the Pacific. The U.S. Pacific Command needed to seize key terrain capable of staging offensive operations towards Japan. General MacArthur determined that U.S. forces would retake the Philippines. Once the U.S. had seized a small foothold in the southern Philippines, at Leyte and Mindoro, here in the south, and here's Mindoro, they could then prepare for an invasion of the northern island of Luzon, where the Japanese had their stronghold. Luzon was important due to the strategic deep water port at Manila. The main effort of the invasion was here. The main effort went down the central plains of northern Luzon, taking strategic airfields, and then onward to Manila. What was key for the division, however, was the securing of the Bataan Peninsula with the Manila Bay here. Whoever controlled that peninsula was able to control entrance in and out of the deep water port there. Next slide. The division's area of interest included the land, air, and seas around northern Luzon. Most of the enemy forces were in the north or in Manila to the east. The threat from the air would have come from the north, while the Japanese naval forces were still able to pose a threat to Allied ships before the invasion. Area of influence included the southwestern coastal Luzon, here. But the division commander was limited to his fire support. However, with light infantry, was able to rapidly mobilize his troops quickly to operate anywhere within the mountainous terrain of the southern Zambul province. Next slide. The division's AO consisted of the Zambuls, Bataan, and Papagana province of western Luzon. The landing at Zubik Bay, here to the west, then taking San Marcelo Airfield just to the north, then moving along Route 7 to the east across the Zambuls Mountains. This route was nicknamed the Zigzag Pass. Route 110 was the north-south highway along the eastern peninsula, and Route 111, the Bagat Pillar Highway, cut the peninsula in halfway to the south. Manila was the capital to the east and had the strategic deep water port, and the Bataan Peninsula again was important due to being able to control the entrance in and out of the bay. Next slide. The peninsula consisted of rough mountainous terrain, including volcanic islands or volcanic mountains. The coast was narrow with only small beaches for landing. To the east, slopes increased significantly into the heavy forests of steep mountains, making troop movement severely restricted. Vegetation was dense with heavy forest and thick underbrush, making navigation and observation very difficult. Weather during this time was mostly insignificant, being January and February, temperatures being in the low 80s to low 90s, and the weather being dry this time of year. The division had been training in Hawaii and Papua New Guinea, so they were acclimated to this type of environment. The main avenues of approach being Route 7, again nicknamed the Zigzag Pass due to the mountainous terrain, was the only all-weather highway that crossed the peninsula. Route 110 to the east and Route 111 there to the south in the peninsula. Again, these were key just due to being the only avenues of approach within this severely restricted terrain. Next slide. Next slide. This is just some pictures of the terrain, and you can see the dense vegetation. You have some soldiers here maneuvering. You can see observation is very, very limited. At times, limited to 100 meters or less. You can see the steep mountain cliffs that they would have been confined to, meaning that those avenues of approach were the only true means of navigation across this terrain. Next slide. You can see the winding trail of the road. Vehicles were very vulnerable to the curves in the past. The enemy were prepared for this. Next slide. Overall, the terrain favored the enemy in the defense. Enemy forces had significant time to prepare and were able to use a substantially smaller force and with less combat power to mount their defense. Terrain slowed U.S. advances, and again, the limited avenues of approach meant U.S. movement was very predictable. The enemy was extensively able to plan for their engagement areas, positioning strongholds at key points. For key terrain, the division being able to seize the airfield opened up the airways for U.S. forces, and controlling the airspace unopposed by Japanese aircraft meant that we were able to prepare for the invasion with bombs and napalm to defeat some of the advantage the enemy had with the terrain. The air was also used for our C2. Pilots were able to guide units into proper positioning. Next slide. General Yamashita, the commander of Japanese forces in Luzon, had prepared for the defense of the island. He organized his forces into three groups: the Shinbu group to the south, the Kinbu group in central Luzon, and the Shobu group in the north, where the bulk of his forces were concentrated with the most proficient troops. Yamashita knew that defending Manila and the Bay was well beyond his capability, so he planned for his three groups to hold mountainous strongholds to delay Allied forces as long as possible to prevent onward operations towards Japan. Prior to the assault, Allied intelligence had badly overestimated the enemy's strength, predicting the Japanese would use 13,000 soldiers in the defense of Bataan, when in fact there was only one infantry regiment with approximately 4,000 soldiers, heavily concentrated along Route 7. Next slide. This is doctrinally what a Japanese infantry regiment would have consisted of during this time. Again, approximately 4,000 troops divided into three light infantry battalions, a headquarters signal company, and a heavy weapons battalion. Next slide. The Nagayoshi Detachment, or the 39th Infantry Regiment, was the bulk of the defense at the time, consisted of just two battalions, a heavy weapons battalion and signal company. One infantry battalion was detached and allocated to the north. However, they were task force receiving a mix of artillery and one battery, light tank platoon, as well as two provisional companies operating as infantry. However, these would have been regimental troops not trained in infantry tactics. The mission of the 39th Infantry Regiment was to conduct an area of defense along Route 7, or the Zigzag Pass, in order to retain key terrain and control the Bataan Peninsula. Next slide. Colonel Nagayoshi's concentrated 2,700 men dug in along Route 7 at the base of the peninsula. Here, one infantry battalion, heavy weapons, and artillery defended the pass. His tanks were also used along Route 7. However, they were positioned more to the east due to the more maneuverable terrain and as a final stand for the enemy defensive. Additionally, one infantry company was garrisoned along Poa, here where we landed, and one to the north at Marcelo Airfield. They were in the garrison position at the time of our invasion. The rest of his forces, about 1,000 troops, were scattered across the peninsula to the east, west, and the south shores of Bataan. The enemy was dug in well with hardened positions. They had prepared for an enduring fight with extensive supplies stored in their elaborate bunkers and tunnels. There were no logistical lines. Every man was prepared to fight to the end. Next slide. Here you can see a sketch of the enemy defensive positions. This is a sketch that the U.S. forces would have used in planning for a zigzag pass. Defensive positions were focused on a natural choke point called the Horseshoe Bend, you can see here. Regiment forces were heavily concentrated to the north and the south, but vulnerable at their flanks. Positions were also oriented to the west and were not prepared well to defend against an eastward assault or envelopment. Artillery and mortars, although insignificant in numbers, were positioned to fire pre-planned targets, but positioning and a lack of C2 did not allow the enemy to mass their fires at all. Next slide. This is the enemy equipment and some of their TTPs. Again, the enemy infantry used extensive trenches and pillboxes that had been prepared for months, if not years, prior to our invasion. They were not a maneuver force. They fought from these bunkers. Snipers were used in the treetops and directed fires. The enemy had tanks and armor. However, these were used as additional fixed positions and not maneuverable. That concludes the situation. I'll be followed by the operations.
Next slide. So before I start, I'm just going to show a little video. This is a speech, I Shall Return, and this is the speech that he gave in the conditions for us coming back in 1945.
I landed on your soil. I said, people of the Philippines since I came, I felt it. Tonight, I repeat this. I felt nothing is more certain than the ultimate peace conquest liberation from the enemy of those and the
Next slide. All right, so as you can see, when we came back, we're ready to come back with vengeance. We're ready to come back strong and take these lands. So our mission actually ties in 2 levels up. Go to the next slide. So we're part of a bigger operation with the 6th Army. And as you can see here, the 6th Army mission was securing Luzon in order to defeat the Japanese 14th Area Army within the AO. On order, we were to retain Luzon in order to set conditions to future operations. So as Captain Simpson was saying earlier, as you can see, a lot of the forces came in from the north to go ahead and take that area anywhere north of Bataan, north of that base, and secure that key infrastructure. Next slide. So we tied directly in to the 11th Corps. The 11th Corps' mission was to seize Bataan in order to destroy enemy forces. On order, the 11th Corps captured Corridor, defeat enemy forces within the AO. So while we did have the time, we were definitely a part of a bigger mission within the time, focusing on key provinces as well as enemies of approach. Next slide. So our mission, the 38th ID. The 38th ID sees a general line down to Lucan Hermosa, which goes along Zigzag Pass right here, all the way to down to Lucan. In order to seal off Bataan for northern Luzon and deny the enemy freedom of moving. On order, the 30th ID seizes the Pillar Road in order to control the Bataan Peninsula. So as you can see here, Pillar Road. So we have Zigzag Pass, which is Highway 7, down to Route 110, all the way down to 111, which is Pillar Road. These are the main enemies of approach that were given to 38 at the time. Next slide. Next slide. So for the execution, not going to read everything here, but I definitely want to point some things out. As you can see in the key tasks, they're very much nested in the mission statement all the way up to 2 levels up, which is sealing Bataan off from northern Luzon. Maintaining that control of the Bataan Peninsula was really key to the success. Control of the Zambales and Papagana provinces. And those provinces were just north and northeast Donalupin, making sure that we secured that whole area in that town and denied any enemy forces seeing the movement. So on order, the end state for this is that 38th ID destroyed Japanese forces in the Zambales and Papagana provinces in Bataan. They supported the 43rd ID and the 6th ID in operations against the Japanese. And I want to point out here that we did learn from 1942 that, unfortunately, sometimes soldiers have to do a specific job, and that job may be more challenging than you expected. And with that, what we learned was the Japanese were not going to go down with the fight. Again, Chaplain's assistant will talk more about their culture, but we realized to take this infrastructure and to take this terrain, we couldn't just take it. We actually had to destroy all the forces on that land to make sure that we could control it. So it definitely played a big role in how it affected our soldiers and operations moving forward. Next slide. So here's a task order, just an idea of how the 38th is broken down. It had 3 infantry regiments, which were essential in the fight, as well as 4 field artillery battalions. They had 1 medical battalion, an engineer battalion, as well as a lot of support companies. So the way they listed it back then is, you can see, we have a list now, documented with terms that we can recognize across the Army. A lot of times then, called they use graphics. Using just a list was a way that they have a lot of things down. So they pushed out a troop list to kind of show who's in the fight. You can see you got the 150 millimeters, 155 that is introduced, as well as other types of artillery rounds and mortar rounds. Next slide. So before getting into the concept of operations and breaking it down by phase, I'm going to pass on to Master Sergeant Dilday. He's going to talk a little more about the equipment and capabilities that the 38th Infantry had.
Good morning, sir. Command Sergeant Majors, Old Hickory. Master Sergeant Dilday, Thunderbolt Mike Gall. I'm just going to speak on some of the American weapons that were vital to the savage battle that we had at the time. Most important, most deadly being the ground-pounding infantry soldier with rifle in hand, every one of which had skin in the game. Due to the dense jungles of the Bataan Peninsula, most of the fighting occurred while the soldiers were already amidst the enemy fight positions. And the range of the weapons was not as significant a factor as the rate of fire. Most effective weapons were just those that they could easily carry into battle. Most of our rifles were 30-06 caliber, 7.62 millimeter up to day. The M1 Garand semi-automatic rifle, as well as the M1903 Springfield and its variants weighed between 8 and 10 pounds and made a good bludgeoning tool when in close combat. The jungles negated 500 to 1,000 yard reach that these weapons were manufactured for, as line of sight and engagement was less than 100 meters majority of the time. Light machine guns were put into action, such as the 30-06 Springfield and the M1941 Johnson light machine gun, also known as the Johnny gun, used to cut through the dense vegetation, seek out and fix the enemy as infantry teams tried to maneuver towards concealed fighting positions. They weighed about 13 pounds and had a rate of fire of 200 to 600 rounds per minute. In comparison, the heavy machine guns, shown here, they weighed roughly about 83 pounds or more, so were laid to the side in lieu of light machine guns and heavier loads of ammunition. Other weapons the infantry soldier used to battle through the enemy fighting positions were the bazooka, also referred to as the stovepipe, which was effective against Japanese infantry emplacements, such as small bunkers and pillboxes. It was not always effective against the softer sand emplacements, which reduced the force of the warhead's impact enough to prevent detonation of the explosive charge. The bazooka was effective in taking out small caliber weapons of the enemy tanks inside the pillboxes, and although when necessary they were capable of penetrating the thin armor of the Japanese tanks. Against the soft emplacements, the bazooka was less effective against. The M2 flamethrower was employed, used to destroy the heavy vegetation and clear and destroy the dug-in positions and pillboxes that the enemy was holed up inside. The flamethrower was under development in July 1940, and the first attempt to use it on Japanese fortifications failed in 1942. After doing their research and their introduction of napalm, They became very effective from 20 to 40 meters at clearing out build-up positions, avoiding soldiers risking their lives trying to enter and combat the enemy underground. Next slide. Anti-tank machine guns and armor were used to a limited extent just due to the mountainous and dense jungle terrains which limited movement. Not to mention the susceptibility to large landmines and artillery barrage. Sherman tanks were used to help suppress the enemy and engage pillboxes housing enemy armor when able. The Japanese tanks were thin-skinned, unlike their soldiers, and making them easy targets for the Shermans. However, with the heavy buildup of positions that the enemy was able to conduct over a 2-year period, 75mm cannons of the Sherman tank were a little bit less effective in most of the battle in the jungle and mountains terrain. Although some Sherman tanks were fixed with flamethrowers, so they could be used to burn out enemy fighters and get them out of their positions. They served as convoy and casualty escorts. See here along cleared routes, site security, and provided concealment and suppressive fire to the infantry squads. Which brings me back to the first point. The primary most effective weapon in the battle, the infantry soldier, who took the fight to the enemy using their pineapple grenades and close combat fighting to overcome the resistance of their enemy and retake the baton offensive. Followed by Captain Jones.
So we're going to go ahead, kind of go into the phases here. So phase 1 was securing Subic Bay. Subic Bay was along the west coast. So this phase started with the landing in the Baton Peninsula and ended with taking the Subic Bay as well as some key terrain. So we were able to breach the shoreline here, secure Blue Beach, get up to San Felipe, as well as the San Marcelino airstrip, which was up here to the north. So one of the things that happens key to this was actually using those integration of fires, using our artillery, kind of having our massing of fires, made it successful. So we had the Navy, we had the Air Force, we had our artillery kind of all coming together to mass these fires and set the conditions for our guys to get onto the beach. As well as once they were able to get on the beach, we worked closely with the Philippines and guerrillas, giving us kind of support and helping us navigate through the roads. So it set us for success and being able to move inland a little bit, and we were able to go down here, start on the San Rita Trail, set a footprint there, as well as start moving up over to Zigzag Pass and setting the foundation for moving along Zigzag Pass. When that was going on, airfields were set. Now we now just have logistical operations and flights in and out of the AO. So again, this phase ended. That's securing the key terrain, settle on the beach line, and ready to move along Highway 7, as well as the Santa Rita Pass. Next slide. So phase 2, this is a seizure of Horseshoe Bend. So as you see here, there's actually 2 operations going on. I'm going to focus on Zigzag Pass. Later, right afterwards, Lieutenant Plum will talk a little more about the Santa Rita Pass. So during this time, they had to move from the west to east. This phase starts with movement along the Zigzag Pass, and it actually ends with setting us up by fire positions and being set right before they hit Horseshoe Bend. They expected and templated a lot of enemy forces using those IV lines and using those dug-in positions to try and attack us and overrun us. So key to this was maintaining control of the land as we moved west to east, destroying all forces and capabilities along the way, and setting the conditions for the envelopment of Zigzag Pass. So what's interesting is over here, the Santa Rita Pass is actually about 8,000 meters, while this is only about 1.5 miles going on this way, a little over 2,000 meters. Yet the 149 was able to make it all the way to the end, this pass, the east coast, before they just hit this 2,000 meters. So it just kind of speaks to the thick vegetation, how slow they had to end up moving, how careful they had to be along this route just to get to this area. And they wanted to take this road just because this road allowed for vehicles to move through, allowed for personnel to move through, so it was definitely really important. Next slide. So in 3 Alpha, this is to clear a Zigzag Pass. This phase started off with airstrikes and artillery and ended with securing of Highway 7. So during this, once we got to Horseshoe Bend, we realized we're going to have to push through. This is probably the most deadly battle we had, and this was a decisive operation in clearing Zigzag Pass. So here, we destroyed the enemies along the way, and that's what I'll get into right now with these numbers. So 152nd sent out their 1st Battalion, As they started sending them forward, they found pillboxes, dug in fighting positions, enemy mortars and infantry, as well as tanks. Doing the same as us, integrating their fires together and trying to mass destroy us along the way. So through effective use of artillery, just resiliency of soldiers, we were able to go ahead, and the 1st Battalion was able to take position 1. After that, we continued to push, took fires in position 2, mortar fires, and went ahead and sent the next battalion over, destroying the enemy, and clear position 2. We continued to move forward along this path up until we got to position 3, and we're setting conditions to keep moving forward. What we did after that, which I found interesting, is 30th AD followed the doctrine we still use a lot today, is our corporal lead technique. So they decided to take their reserves and start pushing north and south to go ahead and clear this area, make sure everything is set and the enemy's destroyed. That's when we found more defensive fighting positions, 1, 4, 5, and 6, in which the reserves went ahead and slowly destroyed the enemy using wet phosphorus to clear enemy's areas, using these flamethrowers to get into their dug positions, to get into their pillboxes, and make sure to destroy them. Once this was set, we were able to continue along to Dunlupin, meeting up with the 149 over in the Dunlupin area. This is probably the biggest battle we've had, I'd say, for the 38th AD, where we had the biggest losses, but also one of the most important battles that we had during this time. Next slide. So I'm going to be followed by Lieutenant Plum. He's going to talk a little bit more about the 149 and their movement across the Santa Rita Trail.
Good morning, Service Sergeant Major, Old Hickory, Lieutenant Plum Operations. So as Captain Jowitz mentioned, there were 2 efforts for this engagement. The main effort consisted of the 149, or the 151st and 152nd, as well as elements of the 3rd Corps. Their mission was to secure Highway 7. The supporting operation consisted of the 149th, and their mission was to envelop the enemy by seizing key terrain at Dinalupin, located here. By doing this, they traveled along the Santa Rita Trail, originally believed to be about 2,000 meters long. However, in actuality, it was closer to 10 kilometers long. So on the 2nd day of marching along the Santa Rita Trail, a spotter plane flew over, saw their position, radioed in, said, "Hey, you're way off course," and they returned back to the beaches. So they returned, pick up an additional battalion from the reserve element, and continued back on the Santa Rita Trail. They completed their movement to Dinalupin within 5 days. It took the 151st and 152nd that same amount of time to reach Horseshoe Bend. Once they reached Dinalupin, they set up roadblocks at Laic, and then continued west on along Highway 7 to meet up with 151st and 152nd. They had their first engagement just west of Bowsett, where they encountered sniper fire. The 149th called in artillery and cleared their first enemy strong point. They continued west, encountered enemy tanks. They employed rifle grenades as well as bazookas. Those proved ineffective against the enemy tanks, so they called in artillery, and the tanks withdrew to concealed positions. The following day, they continued their westward movement, encountered enemy tanks again, calling in friendly artillery. They cleared their second strong point. They continued westward, setting up patrols to the north and to the west. And on the morning of the 13th, those patrols met elements of the 151st and effectively continued clearing enemy strong points throughout the rest of the day and into the 14th. This allowed for movement along Highway 7 and allowed them to prepare for continued operations. Next slide, please. On the morning of the 18th, naval and air bombardments took place at the beaches of Marvels and along the east coast of the Bataan Peninsula. The 151st landed at 10 a.m. at the beach of Marvels and secured the beachhead with little opposition. They then sent patrols out to the east and to the west to secure Highway 111. At the same time, the 149th marched from Dinalupin south to secure Highway 110. As they did this, they secured Orin and Pilar as well. While this was going on, Filipino guerrillas assisted Army engineers in building a network of bridges throughout the dense jungle terrain, allowing for easier movement and maneuver throughout the AO. So the U.S. forces were able to secure control of the Bataan Peninsula. Next slide. Now we added a 5th phase to this simply because of how long it took for the U.S. to clear the Bataan Peninsula. Up to this point, we had control over it, However, given the way that the Japanese fought, it took us about 2 months to clear the peninsula. The Japanese soldier refused to surrender. They believed that surrendering brought shame upon themselves and their families. So they would rather fight to the last man, employing guerrilla techniques from caves and their network of trenches. Fort Drum is a great example of just how brutal and dehumanizing this fight became. Fort Drum was a concrete fortress originally used by U.S. forces in the first Battle of Bataan. At this time, it housed about 500 Japanese soldiers. So the 7th Naval Fleet, along with engineers, ended up pumping 400 gallons of oil into Fort Drum and lighting it ablaze. And that's what this picture here on the right is. To sum it all up, of the some 2,400 enemy combatants at the end of this engagement, the U.S. only took 25 prisoners. I'll be followed by Lieutenant Gorsuch who fires.
Good morning, sir, Sergeant Major, Old Hickory, Lieutenant Gorsuch who fires. As previously discussed, the 38th ID used lethal fires to decisive effect in the Battle of Bataan. Non-lethal fires were also used in order to prep the battlefield for the Allied invasion. Leading up to the occupation, friendly forces used feinting operations to cause the Japanese to believe that the attack would come from the south end of the island. In conjunction, the Allies dropped mannequins out of parachutes to the southern coast to help achieve effects on the battlefield. During the Battle of Bataan, lethal fires were used most decisively in phases 3 and 4 of the operation. During phase 3, after the occupation of Zigzag Pass, 3 105mm light FA battalions, as well as 1 240mm FA battalion, systematically bombarded the Japanese entrenchments in a rolling barrage, softening their defensive positions before the decisive engagement in Horseshoe Bend. This methodology was decisive in forcing the enemy to retreat east to the less favorable terrain in Orion and Bengala. Field artillery played a unique role in the movement east along Zigzag Pass in that it was used extensively to target enemy armor, as friendly armor was unable to maneuver through the dense vegetation by and large. Within the first 3 days of the attack, the 138th, 139th, 163rd, and 932nd FA battalions fired a total of over 8,000 rounds. 81mm mortar fire was also integrated into the battle, using white phosphorus to burn off the underbrush and camouflage of the enemy emplacements. This allowed maneuver forces to more easily target and engage the enemy. During phase 4, naval surface gunfire, heavy airstrikes, napalm bombs, and strafing fires decimated the Marabels in support of the 152nd and 151st Infantry. This set the battlefield by substantially attriting the enemy prior to the engagement by the maneuver elements. In total, over 93,000 gallons of napalm and 486,000 pounds of bombs were dropped during the battle. Next slide. So this is just a brief kind of overview of the role of firearms in World War II.
The Jap bombardment, May 1942. Captured Jap films just released by the U.S. War Department show Old Glory Hall down. In its place, the banner of barbarism. A black day branded on the memory of America. Started the terrible march to captivity. 11,000 heroic Yanks and Filipinos overpowered after 4 months of siege. In their names, the U.S. vowed vengeance. Now, nearly 3 years later, Corregidor's our goal, as my father's men take over in the Philippines. The rock that guards the entrance to Manila Harbor becomes the target for American planes. A polywog-shaped island with topside, a high plateau at the head, and breakaway point at the tail. American airmen unload what they call rock crushers. Revenge is in the air, and revenge is sweet. Guns of the 7th Fleet join the chorus. Never did American gunners do their job more thoroughly. Transports at aiming Doro Island Air Base take aboard a load of the Army's fighting troops of the 503rd Parachute Infantry Regiment. Men who smile as they undertake one of the war's most hazardous missions. Corregidor bound, several asked this assignment to avenge brothers and buddies. Bombardment of the rock stops. Each transport cruises over several times because topside the drop zone is only 1/2 square mile, a mighty dangerous landing spot. The invasion attack on Corregidor comes literally out of the blue. It takes iron nerves just to make this jump, let alone fight when you get there. One of the first to land is Signal Corps Private Getzheimer, who filmed many of these scenes. If they miss, it's the rocky shores or the bay. Even on the fairly level terrain that was once an American parade ground, it's no bed of roses. The plateau covered with chutes. For 2 hours they bail out to form 10-man combat teams for the cleanup. Jap gun positions they're to take are spotted by rocket-firing planes. Now invasion from the sea. The Japs caught in the old American squeeze play. Men of the 34th Infantry Regiment storm ashore at San Jose Beach. Veterans of many amphibious landings, they've helped make them an American specialty. Now they're driving for junction with the paratroops. The old story with variations, blasting the Japs from caves, jungle, and pillboxes. Corregidor took the Japs 4 months to conquer. It falls to the Yanks in just 12 days. America echoes the words of General MacArthur. Hoist the colors, and let no enemy ever haul them down.
I'm followed by the 4.
Morning team. One of the key points for sustainment or the takeaway from this operation was the fact that the Bataan Peninsula was the western edge of Manila Bay. Now the key point from Manila Bay was that it was a world-class deep water port, and by taking Bataan Peninsula, we were able to fully utilize the port to resupply future operations to fully take Luzon. And from there, we were able to fully resupply the Pacific campaign and our ultimate goal of Japan. Next slide. This is just a quick breakdown of the type of supply that each soldier would have carried during the battle. 2 key points for this one. All transportation of supply during the battle was done on foot. Everything was hand carried or carried on packboards by the soldiers. As mentioned, it took 5 days for the 1 unit to move across that pass. All of their resupply for food and ammunition was hand carried with them. Resupply was done daily by air jobs and to the beaches. The beaches were taken without little resistance, so resupply was easy. Next slide. Class 1, they had C ration and K rations. While K rations were for the airborne troops, it was a larger ration. C rations were for the ground troops and the infantry. They had to carry 2 C rations per soldier, and then all the rest of it was carried with them on the packboards. Next slide. Their class 3, compared to how we use fuel tankers today, all of their resupply for fuel was done with oil drums, which was carried on the trucks. Route 7 was being the only road through the AO, was only be able to be utilized once it was cleared by the troops. So all resupply was done by trucks up until a point and then hand carried from there. Although vehicles were used very little during the battle, as we mentioned earlier. Next slide. Class 5, this is their basic combat load. During this fight, however, the troops opted to ditch many of their heavy weapons, heavy crew serve weapons, and opt for the lighter weapons due to the mountainous and rugged terrain. So they would have carried more than this for their basic combat load. And many of them probably would have helped carry 60mm mortars along with them to help out the gun crews. Next slide. This is just a basic look at the kit for the infantrymen during this fight. They would have had their haversack to carry supplies, their E-tool. They would have had 4 bandoliers to carry between 12 and 24 magazines apiece. They had their K-bar, canteen, and a small first aid pouch. If there's any more questions, I'll be followed by S1.
Good morning, Captain Miller, Battalion S1. The United States overestimated that the Japanese would have nearly 13,000 troops. Therefore, the U.S. was armed with 34,000 total troops, 30,000 U.S. military, and 4,000 Filipino guerrillas. The Japanese are actually armed with a mere 2,800. Throughout this 22-day period of the Battle of Bataan, the United States suffered 338 killed in action and 688 wounded in action. Fun fact, the first U.S. casualty did not occur at the hands of the Japanese. The first U.S. casualty was actually gored by a bull. The Japanese suffered a total of 2,500 casualties. Their 300 remaining soldiers escaped with their leader, Colonel Nagayoshi. At the bottom of the slide is a quotation taken from General MacArthur as he overlooked the U.S. POWs retreat during the Luzon campaign. He states, "They remained silent as though at inspection. I looked down the lines of men, bearded and soiled, with ripped and soiled shirts and trousers, with toes sticking out such shoes as remained, with suffering and torture written on their gaunt faces. Here was all that was left of my men of Bataan and Corregidor. As I passed slowly down the scrawny, suffering column, a whisper said, 'You're back,' or 'You made it.' I could only reply, 'I'm a little late, but we finally came.'" This quote highlights the ruthlessness that the Japanese took upon the U.S. during the 1942 Battle of Bataan, which fueled the aggressive nature of the U.S. during the retaking of Bataan, resulting in only 25 Japanese prisoners of war. Slide. These are the total awards given during all three campaigns for the 38 during World War II. I'll be followed by the Meadow.
Morning, sirs. Morning, Hickory. In the same way, lessons learned, we learned, like as commanders, how to change our tactics and how to fight different enemies, different scenarios. Medicine learns from every fight as well. A quote here from Brian J. Ford talks about the atrocities of war and how we in the medical community use the atrocities of war to help push medicine forward, to help change how we treat and how to save lives. Some of the indications of that in World War II was the introduction of penicillin. Penicillin was invented sometime around World War I. However, by World War II, due to the incoming war, the medical community and the scientific community had to find a way to make penicillin available on the front line. And by the time we got to the end of World War II, penicillin was 20 times more potent than its original manufacturing. So that's a really quick lesson learned. Sulfonamides. This is just antibacterial. This is some of the original versions of that. If we saw a lot of movies you guys see, they got the guys down, they rip open a pouch, they pour a powder in there. That powder is a sulfonamide. That sulfonamide is antibacterial, so it's killing the bacteria on the outside of the wound before they apply their Carlisle dressing. The Carlisle dressing, most of us carry in our early careers. I've been in for 20 years. The 4883, the old first aid dressing, that was actually high-speed technology back then. It was basically the predecessor was the Carlisle bandage. They introduced the sulfonamide powder that was taken away when it was found to be ineffective versus an oral antibiotic. We also see the introduction and growth of the Army blood program. World War I, the big lesson we learned there is that we didn't have that kind of, we didn't have liquids, and we didn't have blood products on the front line, and then we learned that could have saved a lot of lives. And then we also have the introduction of the first attempt to do a malaria prophylaxis. So if you're here in 03, 04, on our first little adventure, we took that pill every day, and everybody got a good chance to go visit the burnout shitters. This is where that kind of started. So that idea of prepping the soldier internally for the fight that you don't win with bullets, that's something we do in the medical community and something that continually changes. Next slide. All right, so here's a quick medcop of the situation before the attack on Bataan. As we moved into Bataan here, in the Bataan Peninsula, on the very first day of the fight, one of the major objectives was to seize the airstrip at San Marcelino. There wasn't a lot of combat there, so we were able to take that airstrip immediately, and we immediately, before beginning to attacking the Route 7, we already had a clear route to medevac. Obviously, helicopters aren't a thing in World War II, so everything is done by plane. You can see here we have the 113th Medical Battalion, the 64th Portable Surgical Hospital attached to the main troops to attack Bataan. We'll go over how they were utilized in a second. A quick note for commanders. We always talk about that golden hour. You guys want to reinforce that, want to say, what's our golden hour? Where can I successfully operate
and maintain that. Average estimated time for evac during this fight was about 2.5 to 5 hours. And that was only thanks to the capture of the San Marcelino airstrip. Without that, it would have been much longer because the fight to the north was successful enough to set up hospitals. Next slide. So here we can see how the medical forces were used. The airstrip to the north, we attacked in Subic Bay. So as they pushed down Route 7, this push was slow and deliberate, but it was on a road. So along that road, they were able to use Jeeps, modified Jeeps, to actually do CASEVAC for those patients. Truck ambulances were introduced in World War II, but they were not mentioned or notated for the Battle of Bataan. So my assumption is that there are no dedicated medevac vehicles during this fight. The red trail represents the Santa Rita Trail. Lieutenant upon belief, the 149th did a huge roundabout trail attack to get to Dunlupin so they could push back against the other side of Route 7. So everything was carried there, including the 113th Medical Battalion and the 64th Surgical Hospital. So this is Charlie Med and the next level higher carrying every bit of their equipment along this trail behind those troops. The reason for that, as commanders, obviously, this is the larger fight. We're expecting the most casualties. However, this fight has the least access for CASEVAC. So they push their medical, the highest quality medical definitive care through that trail, knowing that the fight here would have access to the CASEVAC, air-evac into the hospital. So as you guys are looking at your medical plans, working with your meadows, where we're going to put our forces, this is how they align their forces. We did the same thing at NTC's 252 in capturing the Valley of Death. In capturing the Valley of Death, we knew that all forces in the Valley of Death would have a limited access to CASEVAC until all routes were cleared. So we pushed all of our medical forces into there, knowing that we had CASEVAC capabilities in other arenas of the fight that 252 was in. And quick note here, so this, I believe they briefed a couple times. This was originally briefed about 2,000 to 5,000 per our guerrilla Filipino help. If you actually Google map this is Route 3 in the current world. And if you straight line distance this, it's about 10 kilometers. So it's over twice the length. So 10 kilometers of carrying medical equipment through here. And then on the next slide, the litter bearers taking every patient from Dunlupin back through that trail by hand to get them to CASEVAC. Okay, so that's what that 5-hour timeline looks like. That's 10 kilometers of jungle, 2-man litter bearer teams carrying every patient that we could air back to that point. Big thing here is 72-hour shifts. The litter bearer was an MOS back then. It was a part of the actual teams. It wasn't, hey, who's available, right? Because we have a lot more transportation availability now. It was dedicated personnel. Rugged terrain, they were often ambushed and often suffered severe psychiatric issues, PTSD type stuff, due to the fact that they're carrying their buddy for 4 or 5 hours who's dying. So you're running, you've got a guy who's dying. So the faster you run, the better chance he has of living. A lot of times he may not have lived, right? So this is where we see a lot of PTSD. We can see here though, this guy had a nice pair of leather straps to help him carry that litter. Help a little bit, but not that much. He also didn't have his ILTV on, so it makes life a lot easier. All right, next slide. Next slide we have here an example of a modified Jeep. So CASEVAC along Route 7, like I said, was mainly done with Jeeps. A typical Jeep, unmodified, can carry 3 patients, 2 off the back, and then 1 across the front here. They drop the window and it hangs over the passenger side seat. This is a modified Jeep. They put some wood on there, some pipe wrenches, whatever they can get together, and they can carry up to 4. And this one has a 5th. We got a walking wounded in there. So this was CASEVAC for the Battle of Bataan. Next slide. Aeromedical evac. There were no platforms dedicated to aeromedevac at the time. So as we secured the airstrip, as more soldiers were flown in, that vehicle was then reconfigured, filled up with patients, and flown out. And then the same thing, soldiers fly in, patients fly out. And that's how aeromedevac would work back then. There were actually like floating hospitals during World War II. None were mentioned to be used in the southern Philippines. I imagine on the main force attack into Luzon they were used. Maybe that's where some of our patients were evac. Fun note, one-day record of 4,704 aeromedevac evac patients were set in 1945. So this fight is happening in 1945. We have an airstrip available. You can imagine that our soldiers are part of that record as far as setting that. And then they also were able to reduce, during World War II, before World War II, aeromedevac flight had 6 in 100,000 deaths out of patients they evac. By the end of World War II, they reduced that down to 1.5 in 100,000. So again, lessons learned, getting better at what they do, and becoming better and more proficient. I'll be followed by the 6th. Or chaplain, excuse me.
Good morning, everyone. Sergeant
Phillips standing in for the chaplain. The main religious consideration for the retaking of Bataan was the Bushido Code, which the Japanese troops lived and died by. This code essentially stated that to surrender and be captured to maintain your life or to retain your life was shameful above all else. So of course the only other option for this was to either win the battle or to die trying, and the Japanese certainly embraced this in this battle. The belief itself added to how savagely the Japanese troops fought, death being considered honorable and sent them to fight to their literal dying breath. So they were a force to be reckoned with. Rather than being taken captive, anybody that was too injured to remain in the battle, many of them would end up taking their own lives to avoid the shame of captivity. This belief also had a direct impact on the number of prisoners of war that were taken during this battle by us. As previously mentioned, that number was simply 25 individuals. The Bushido Code allowed Japanese to also view the prisoners of war taken from the original Battle of Bataan as something less than human. Since they had surrendered to maintain their lives, they had also, in their eyes, surrendered their right to be treated with dignity or respect, and they were treated as such. So these POWs faced horrible treatment while in captivity, were malnourished, and many of them lost their lives as well. In direct opposition to this was the American treatment of prisoners of war. Of course, we call it the early stages of the Geneva Convention at that time. This held that POWs were to be treated with a certain amount of respect and dignity, as well as to be fed and medically cared for. On another note, morale, resiliency, and spirituality would play an important part after the battle, or the retaking of Bataan. Chaplains would provide comfort to the soldiers who faced savagery, either be it through the Japanese as enemies or savagery that they themselves had to commit to due to simply facing an enemy that would not give up until the last man was down. Two chaplains of note are listed here, Robert B. Taylor and William Thomas Cummings. They were both taken as prisoners of war following the original Battle of Bataan. Chaplain Taylor specifically is a perfect example of the harsh treatment of prisoners of war during the Japanese captivity. So Chaplain Taylor, after being found to have smuggled in food and medicine for troops in that camp, was confined to a hot box made of tin and bamboo that was 4 foot tall. He was neither able to stand up entirely, lay down, or even sit down. He was confined to this for 14 weeks straight. He was only released from this box upon being thought to be dead. He was actually in a coma at that time. Fortunately, he made a full recovery from that coma. He survived the rest of his captivity, was freed at the end of the war, went on to recover and continue his service, and eventually obtained the rank of Major General. At this time, I'll be followed by the S6.
Good morning, Hickory 6, distinguished guests, Thunderbolt 9 November on the net. During World War II and the Battle of Bataan, the primary means of communications at that time was the field telephone. This was primarily dependent on the deployment and maintenance of your wire. Basically, it was strung along bushes or from tree to tree, especially in the Bataan area. It went from then the palm trees. That was the areas the S2 briefed. A lot of times that was where the enemy deployed their snipers. So for the wire teams, this was a dangerous time because they were very soft targets out there, usually working in two-man teams to deploy the wire. Your alternate means of communications at that time was messenger or runner. And a lot of these were your lower ranking soldiers like your privates in the Signal Corps. They did your messenger work, and a lot of times they had to do this either by vehicle or on foot. And they were isolated and by themselves, and the danger there was being lost, captured, or killed. Next slide. The main points to take away on this slide is challenge and password, which was used a lot during World War II. That was to help keep the enemy out of your formations, either at security checkpoints or into your perimeter or out of your operations area. Not so much at the Battle of Bataan, but the Germans were big on their having spies into your formation. So you might have a challenge in password. Say, example would be, the challenge would be skin. Your password would be research. So you would get challenged. You say, I have skin in the game. Yes, I did my research. Would be your password. Another big takeaway here is, of course, the development of the FM radio, which was an innovation at the time during World War II. And a big shortcoming was your poor overall operational capabilities contributed to terrible C2 in command and control. Basically, it was kind of sometimes like a free-for-all. You might have a commander up in an aircraft trying to direct his soldiers in the field of battle. Next slide. Okay, in 1940, Galvin Manufacturing, now known as Motorola, received a contract from the War Department. And the primary purpose of this contract was to develop a portable battery-operated radio for use by infantry units to communicate with their battalion headquarters. The result of that was the SCR 300. This radio had two antenna systems right here, which one was 33 inches and the other had 8 sections, and it could fold out to 10 feet long, which you usually used when you were at, say, a patrol or rest area where you were in a base camp. And the range on this radio was 3 to 5 miles, depending on which antenna system you used. And in patrols and in formations, this radio drew a lot of attention for enemy snipers that they really liked. So basically, they were big targets. And over here's an example of the differences between the phonetic alphabet that we had. Over here is what we're currently using, and then on the right is what they used during World War II. You can see some of the differences there. This radio, the SCR 300, was a big advantage for us because it gave us the ability for company commanders to talk back to their battalion headquarters, and it also gave us the reach for fire missions and adjust fire missions for the forward observers and the artillery, because we had a big advantage in Bataan with our artillery assets. So this really gave us the ability to hammer home against the enemy. Next slide. This is an example of a World War II water buffalo, and here we have a signal team out deploying wire. You can see in the background the tanks. This is how they had to carry a lot of wire, and they usually worked in 2-man teams, and they were a soft target for the enemy. And we spent a lot of time on wire maintenance because of our signal plan. Next slide. This is an example of a EEA field telephone, which had a wire that ran into your switchboard, say at a company CP, and then there would be additional wire to back to each of your echelons of communications. Any questions? I will be followed by Thunderbolt 5. Thunderbolt 9 November off the net.
All right, team, like I said earlier, this was a very successful operation. The 38th ID achieved all its goals and accomplished their mission fully. One key fact I want to bring up as I was sitting here thinking about it, just to describe, further drive home what kind of enemy we were dealing with. The last Japanese soldier to surrender into the Philippines did not do so until 1974. They finally got one of his previous commanders to come and talk to him in the jungles and coax him down and tell him the war was over. So not until 1974, roughly 30 years after the war had already. Sir, some key takeaways that we came up with, sir, you have driven home to us. We've all got it, the knife fight, the importance of being able to do the knife fight. Well, this is the knife fight. The spirit of the bayonet flowed freely during this battle and throughout the campaign in the Pacific. The infantry soldiers, as Master General talked about, used fire, maneuver, and close combat in the Battle of Bataan to destroy the enemy. I would say another critical key takeaway, you cannot break the enemy's will to resist. We could not break the Japanese will to resist. we must break or destroy the enemy. So to paraphrase a famous quote, people will sleep at home safely in their beds at night only because rough men stand ready to do rough deeds on their behalf. We are all soldiers, whether you're combat arms or not. And we face some fanatical enemies today like they faced back then in the Pacific Theater. So you have to be prepared mentally and physically to do what needs to be done to win that fight, to protect your nation and your loved ones at home. So keep that in mind. Another key thing, it didn't happen much in the division, but they talked about in the war, the analysis of the S2 and what they were facing. The division and the lower elements had some intelligence that they could have pushed up. They did push up to refine that intelligence of what they were actually facing. They were facing far less. They got a lot of good G2 from the guerrillas on the ground, but higher headquarters wasn't that receptive, and they could have adjusted some things and moved some troops around, but they did. Like the long video, the fires guy threw in on us. They gave an attaboy to our 82nd brethren that are here today. The importance of combined arms operations and fires, especially all types of fires, and coordinating all levels of fires. In the end, fire enables maneuver. Fire enables maneuver. When I went through infantry school, they drove that through my head. Use your fires. Without fires, you cannot maneuver. Without that, you can't kill anything. I thought this was kind of interesting. Being that we were a colonial power and we had occupied the Philippines for like 40 years before this fight ever happened, the lack of maps, which really affected their ability to maneuver. So they, those things that we showed, we got from the 38 history books, those sketches, that's what they actually had to use to conduct the fight, because they didn't have the maps of the area that we have today. Enabling maneuver right here, the Master Gunner talked about that as well. They made some on-the-fly decisions. They ditched their heavier weapons to allow them to move farther, faster, and carry more supplies. The terrain, how terrain limited us, really favored the enemy, so be aware of your terrain. And sir, this is near and dear one to your heart. I picked this one out just for you, and it's near and dear to the 252. If you remember the Valley of Death, the NTC, because of the limits of their communication systems, what they would do at the end of the day, the commanders would get up in the aircraft and say, hey, Thunderbolt 6, you reported to me that you're over here, you're way over here, you need to move. And that's how they adjusted and achieved some command and control and dealt with the fog of war that they were having to deal with because of their lack of communication. Finally, I'll say, we learned one thing the hard way by forcing ourselves. We thought we were making it easier by using the op-order template brief. Well, that forced us, especially the 3, to go back and change their terms of doctrine into our terms of doctrine and use the tactical task. So that was a good staff exercise for us. Sir, we're set. If you have anything, or
General Gunn, just real quick, just as we go through, think of questions that you might want to ask. Always at the end of this, I like to pry the audience for some questions or some thoughts or some difference. So, sir, I want to give the time to you and not go there yet.
So first, let me start by thanking you for the research and for the presentation. Really well done, well staffed. It's always interesting to see how we, the United States Army, have faced tactical tasks in the past and how we have overcome them. And when you look at this, a couple of things kind of stick out to me. War will always be hard. Okay, whether we're fighting here in the desert or you're fighting in mountainous, channelizing terrain, it will always be difficult. And as such, you're a part of the continuum of combat that the United States Army has engaged in for hundreds of years. And no matter where we are at, the key contributor to winning any conflict is the U.S. Army soldier. This does not get done unless you are willing to close with and destroy the enemy. There is no change. We talk about everything that we have, and every weapon system, every combat support system we have is really geared to and designed to do one thing. And that is to bring you into close contact with the enemy. But at the end of the day, It's the individual soldier that's the weapon. And it's always going to be a test of wills. This never gets easy. And the reality of it is that soldiers will pay with their blood based on what we do. That was true then. It was true last night. So the face of war may change, but the actions and the activities do not. And at the end of the day, it's based on the individual soldier, how prepared you are to close with and destroy the enemy. That's why physical fitness is so important. Everything that you see in these battles pertains to a level of physical fitness that's required to do what we have to do. Your mental toughness will often dictate who wins. There is nothing good. There is nothing positive that comes out of combat other than the fact that you win. You take care of your buddies to your left and right. But the final thing I will say to you that makes me very proud of the U.S. military. We fight wars according to the rules. And you might say, why is that important? Because you will live with what you do. We retain the law of land warfare because if we engage in combat and you prevail, you will never be free of what you did while you were in combat. That's why you treat prisoners of war the way that you do. So 30 years from now, you're not regretting what you did. And it is a leader's responsibility to ensure that we maintain the laws of land conflict so that you protect your soldiers, not only now, but in the future. There's nothing worse than a soldier who has to live with something that they did wrong for the rest of their lives. That's why it's important, not only for the sake of battle, but for the sake of what we will remember when a battle is complete. At the end of the day, when you look at what our forefathers did, you can stand and you can kind of watch and be amazed at what they were able to accomplish in some of the most difficult situations that they found themselves in. The final thing I'll say is they were just like you. Every generation steps up and we fulfill our role so long as we're in the military. So when you got here, you were immediately confronted with a challenge to deploy a unit to a combat theater of operation. You rose to the challenge. You did that. Just like your fathers and your grandfathers, we all are faced with tactical challenges and problems. And if you ever wonder how they did it because they had to, because that was the mission. You know, one of the things that I'm fond of saying, for us, there is only duty. For the National Guard soldier, you leave home, you leave your jobs, you come here to execute the mission. Why would you do that? The only reason I can think of that you would ever leave all of that and come here is there is only duty. Why else would you be here? Now granted, the accommodations here at Buring are pretty cushy. Food's great, entertainment never stops, and yet, here you are. There is only duty. And so you are the key contributor of why we have deterrence in this theater, why we will prevail. At the end of the day, 99% of the U.S. population depends on you to get the job done. Wherever, whenever we're called upon, we execute the mission because there is only duty. It's the only reason we're here. And it's why I'm privileged, why I'm honored to be associated with you. So as we get ready to conclude our deployment, the 38th gets ready to depart, you can rest assured that each and every one of you will always be a significant, pleasant memory for me. What an honor to have you a part of Task Force Spartan. What a privilege I've had to watch you perform in some difficult circumstances. And you will forever, now and forever, be a part of the proud history of the 38th Infantry Division. This division is better because we had you as one of our subordinate elements. We've been able to improve our performance because we listened and we allowed bottom-up refinement. And you have risen to the challenge. It's always hard as you near the end and you look back and you think about what we could have done better or different. But what I will say in relation to the 30th, the best thing we did was to work closely with you and facilitate your mission success. Make no mistake about it, the missions that you have achieved were successful because of what you did. Never hang your head, never go home, and never fail to answer anyone who asked what you were doing here. Because of you, this theater is a safer place than when you came. Because of you, the deterrence to the regional aggressors here has been maintained, and you continue to do the mission. So you will always be a part of our proud heritage. It's been an honor and a privilege to serve with each and every one of you. I always say if you get down to Southern Ohio, you're around in Brown County, stop by the sheriff's office. We always have coffee, so you're always welcome to a cup. But what an honor to be able to command a unit like this. So thanks for everything that you've done. Major Christ, anywhere around? Maybe later. It's all good. One positive note for you. As we depart, good news story, get the 42nd Infantry Division taking our place. Fully capable, wholly prepared, and ready to step into the mission. We had a fairly adventurous deployment in the 38th, and I know probably General Ferrari was thinking, well, how do we top that? Good news. Figured out a way in the last week. So I think they're going to have an active deployment also. But they are well trained, well prepared, and they will step right in and continue forward progress. Ferrari?
Just a great job on mission analysis, good brief, very interesting. I was not I hadn't done my research on that battle, but it was a good update. Great job, I understand. Cool.
Yes, sir. Thanks, sir. Hey, I don't have anything left. I think the general said everything I wanted to say. He read my mind already. Just to remind you again, I always talk about the knife fight with us. Who trains those soldiers to be ready to be in that knife fight? Because every time we do one of these, it always ends up being the individual soldier that's in the fight, down to that individual soldier in that knife fight. So as the general said, we talk about physical fitness, we talk about training our soldiers, we talk about giving the right equipment. At the end of the day, it comes down to that soldier being ready to get in that knife fight, get in that phone booth, and win that freaking knife fight. And that's what we train our soldiers to do every time, every day when we come to work. So I challenge you that, you know, the boss had spot on. I don't have to say any more than that, except appreciate your time today. We'll get out of here. I think we've been in here long enough, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here today.